everyone. This is a Cyrus says with a lot of pressure and stress on me because we've got a big man, and I mean big, 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 and he's actually physically big as well. But I won't get into that. I've met him once in my life.
Coming from you, Cyrus. Sorry,
That's it.
carry on.
Typical. This is the problem with the British. No manners. I can't
You were
understand. Why can't you be like
you were
us?
this thin babe magnet when you first went on MTV. Anyway, we'll go.
That's true, actually. Can we take a look at the voice behind? Yeah, the face behind the voice. That's right. I didn't think you'd remember, William. We actually met a couple of times back in the
I
day.
do remember. Absolutely, I remember. I'm a big fan. I've been following quietly from the sidelines.
I'll have to stop the show because there's sarcasm, there's satire, and there's whatever the hell you're doing. All right. People are tuning in for you. When you start saying you're a big fan of some moron on a music channel, I mean, that's the end of the world. That's worse than the pandemic. Which reminds me, you're in London. So how's it going there?
So I'm double vaxxed and have had COVID. So we're feeling that perhaps wrongly that we're as safe as you can be, but it's spreading very fast, particularly among the younger generation, my kids' age, who are either unvaxxed or have just had one vaccination now. And they are the ones going down, but the old folks like me are sitting pretty, and we're all having a party while the kids are staying inside. So it's a very unusual situation here.
Well, that's fine. I think it's about time the roles are reversed. But what do we call you? Do we say Sir William, Lord William, the Earl of Kent,
you
Mr.
can call me whatever you
Dalrymple?
like, but I answer to Will. If you want
So
to
I
call me
was
the Earl of
hoping
Kent, you're very welcome.
I was hoping more like a Billy Bob thing, but I guess that's more American. You would never go
I'm
down to a Billy
Scottish.
Bob.
You have to
You're Scottish. I've
you
done
have
my
to call me
research. I've done my research. You're
Wally.
very much
Wally, you
Scottish.
have to say.
You're not really Scottish, William. You're
I am
actually a Delhi.
Scottish.
You're a Delhiite. I mean,
Well, you can be both.
hate
You can be
I hate
both.
to remind you. No, you can't. I've met the
You
Delhiites.
can.
They're very different. Yeah,
Ethnic Scots, resident for
yeah.
30 years in Delhi. It's not complicated. Like Parsis,
Which our first literary
ethnic
question.
Iranian, but
Okay, yeah, something like that. So we'll start with this question. Then let's rank our politicians in terms of performance. Since you're exposed to all, Kejriwal, Boris Johnson, and our Prime Minister. Who's done the best during the pandemic?
I think all three go into the relegation, the bottom league.
Wrong
Not
answer.
one of those. Not one of those has performed well. But
Oh,
surprisingly, funny enough, the one thing that's gone well in this country, I'm speaking from London, is that despite the government, like other governments, failing to take the pandemic seriously at first and avoiding lockdowns that would have saved a lot of lives, this side they have managed to get the vaccinations out. And Britain is now, I think, 65% double vaxxed and 55%
wow.
single vaxxed.
And we are
Which
doing. Sorry to
this
interrupt.
is the worrying thing. Yeah, no, I mean, there's only been 1% improvement on the vaccination in India since the wave in April, which is very,
Yeah.
very worrying news, obviously.
So your next book won't be the last Mughal. It'll be the last Indian, because that's the way it's
Well,
going. We're at 5%.
it's very frightening, and it's not necessary. I mean, obviously, India does have the incredible pharmaceutical capacity to sort this out, but for whatever reason, it hasn't been sorted so far, and that is a worry for anyone that wants to be in India and be healthy. Yeah.
And if William Dalrymple would like to put his finger on that reason as a betting man, it would be.
I remember reading a review that Aravinda Diga wrote once of Patrick French's book, and the last line I thought was very good. And he said, he was criticizing something in the book and said French's predictions have one flaw. He didn't take into account the perennial overconfidence of the new India. And I think this situation with the vaccination has been an example of that. There was a sensation that India had beaten the virus and that everything was fine. And I mean, I was wandering around happily around the country February, March, April, usually without a mask, and was all over Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka and Tamil Nadu and Goa, and was traveling very freely while Britain at that stage was under lockdown. But now here we are 4 months later, and we're out of lockdown in London and 60% vaxxed. And things are not looking so pretty at the moment, sadly, back in Delhi.
But at the same time, Boris Johnson extended the lockdown till July 21st or 24th, if I got the date wrong, by 3 weeks. So obviously still batting on the side of the conservative.
So what's happening here at the moment is that the rate of increase in the virus is hugely rising, and it's now higher per capita than India. But the hospitalization rate is much lower. It's still flat. So what's basically happening is that the virus is spreading, but because there's such high vaccination rates, people are not going to hospital and are not dying from it. So it's become a flu here. So
there you go.
So it's something you want to avoid getting. It's no fun having the flu, but you're not going to end up on a ventilator, and you're certainly not going to end up with black fungus all over you or any of the other horrors that are happening.
So I'm just writing an open letter to the government of India from you, William Dalrymple, saying that you've got the vaccination is the only way to go, and stop wasting my time with anything else, and just enter the houses and forcibly vaccinate people left, right, and center, which is the way of the democratic and egalitarian setup that we have in India. But I see you're smiling, so we'll leave it there. Having been exposed to 30 years in Delhi and various governments. So the two things to talk about.
No, but I think it is. I mean, it's a sad situation, and I'm sure India can turn this around. That you have the capacity very quickly. There is a huge pharmaceutical industry in India, and it can be done. But at the moment, I don't understand why only 1% has been vaccinated since April, and that's something that can be sorted out, and I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, but don't forget, according to your own book, it was what, like a room in London and 3 people and a couple of windows, and they ran a whole country. So at the same time, there's also that. So I want to talk about the books. Obviously, we'll start with that, but want to also understand the life of William Dalrymple in 20 minutes if we can, because it's fascinating. Your journey from Scotland or wherever in the beginning, landing up in Delhi, then all over the world, and this love for Indian history, which is actually embarrassing and shocking to most of us, because we can't hold a conversation with you because you keep picking holes in our argument, especially those who want to say the Mughals didn't exist and lost all the wars, and 1556 didn't happen, and etc. etc. I'm sure you've heard that. Not 1556 so much as 1526. That's the 2 dates I do remember, and the third one is with my daughter, my wife, who's also slightly from that era, but she can't hear us, so we're okay. So let's go into this. The book first, the Company Quartet, which is the incomplete works of William Dalrymple, but 4 of them together, like an anthology.
Sure. So for the last 20 years, I've been writing these 4 books on the East India Company. The East India Company, because everyone always talks about the British taking over India, looting India, conquering India, however you want to put it. But for most of that period, from 1600 till 1858, it wasn't the British government. It wasn't coming out of Downing Street or the Foreign Office or a government ministry. In a much more sinister way, it was coming out of a private office in the City of London, which, as you rightly said, at the beginning, right up until the time of Plassey, was only 6 windows wide. It was not a large building. But this small building, which at the time contained, amazingly, only 35 staff, organized a extraordinary corporate takeover of the fractured post-Mughal India. Well, after the Marathas came up from Mumbai and smashed into Surat and started breaking down the Mughal Empire, India fragmented into city-states. So you get places like Jodhpur, Jaipur, Udaipur, all these places, the hill states, Hyderabad, breaking up into individual city-states, with the Marathas sitting in the middle, the remains of the Mughals in the north, the Sikhs rising up in the Punjab. And what had been a big, unified, strong state with 1 million men under arms becomes this fractured. It's like you throw a mirror out the window and it sort of smashes into 1,000 pieces. And this is hoovered up, not by the British government, but by a private corporation. And the astonishing thing is, as I said, there's only 35 people in the head office at the beginning of this, although it's obviously much larger by the end. And there's only 250 white guys sitting in Calcutta at the same time. How is it done? It's done bizarrely and impossibly to imagine to us. It's done by Indian mercenaries fighting for this corporation, the sepoys, against Indian soldiers. And who's paying their wages? Indian bankers are lending money to the corporation. Why? Because they know they're going to get their money back on time with interest. The corporation, if it does one thing, it repays its loans on time because it's a corporation. That's what corporations do. They know about interest rates and this sort of thing. So if you're a banker sitting in Murshidabad or Calcutta or Benares, and you have a choice of lending to the Marathas, who might cut your hand off if you ask for your money back with interest, or to offer it to the corporation, a lot of people chose to give it to the East India Company, and so they use Indian capital and Indian soldiers to take over India. And this, of course, is completely different from anything else that's ever happened, not only in Indian history, but anywhere else in the world. It's very difficult to think of another place where a company, the equivalent of Facebook or Google or Microsoft or Walmart, name your big multinational corporation, where they take over a country. And it's not just any old country. You mentioned earlier the kind of way that the Mughals are depicted in today, and often they're seen as the bad guys. But in a sense, the thing that we've forgotten is that all that, even the traditional Mughal image in Bollywood of, sort of Aishwarya Rai lying out with Hrithik Roshan producing a white pigeon from under his whatever.
Magician, yeah.
All that stuff. And, sort of dropping mangoes into mouths and there's dancing girls and fountains. All that is paid for by industry. India at this point is the richest place in the world. 40% of the world's economy is coming, the world's gross domestic product is coming out of India in about 1750. So behind all those sort of Mughal-e-Azam scenes of dancing girls and what have you, you've got a lot of Bengali weavers working, 24/7 and producing the world's greatest textiles very cheaply, which the company is then shipping around the world. And it makes its money by basically being the shippers for Mughal India. So it's a huge con. It's an extraordinary story.
William, there's a point here which I think may be lost a little bit. And an unpatriotic Indian may say it, me or you for that matter. I consider you very much a Delhiite. And that is that Indians will do anything for money. That being the moral of the story and the bottom line. And hence, you could subjugate an entire race of people because they're just willing to just fight each other and do your bidding for cash.
Well, I think you could say that about most people. I'm a Scot, and we're not known for our aversion to cash ourselves. And but certainly in this case, that's what happens. The company succeeds in borrowing money from Indian bankers and raising 200,000 Indian troops with a tiny staff of white officers. And these guys, they don't send the Punjabis to attack the Punjabis. They send the Tamils to attack the Punjabis. They send the Punjabis to attack the Tamils, and they use. And in a sense, also at this point, they don't have to divide and rule because India has already been divided in this post-Mughal breakup. If you're from Tanjore, you don't think you're necessarily the brother of the guy from Delhi. The nation state.
There's no nationalism. Nationalism feeling never existed.
It's beginning to exist in some places by 1857 is an example of a sort of beginnings of a national feeling, but it certainly is not around at the time of Plassey, and it's slightly everyone's to himself. And this corporation just takes advantage of that, and it finds people that are willing to lend it money. It repays on time, and it buys 200,000 mercenaries. To put this in context, the British army, the actual government army in London, only has 100,000 troops. Fighting for king and country, but the East India Company sitting in Calcutta has 200,000 troops, answering not to a king or an emperor, but merely to the servant of a director of a stock company. Wow. It's extraordinary. I mean, even now, after I spent 20 years writing this story, I still can't quite get over what an extraordinary tale it is.
You'll need protection. You can't come back to India. It's highly embarrassing, this story. I mean, it would be better to be subjugated by the sword and losing a battle and hence the territory with it. This is almost like the intrigue behind it. The fact that, nobody really cares. Is just throw some cash on the table and boom, you get your job done.
What's kept me going with this, and I say I've been at it for 20 years now, and the Anarchy, although it was the last, I hold it up just to show the cover, the Anarchy, though it was the last to be written, is in fact chronologically the first, and there's 4 books. Anarchy is the first one. Second one is, which anarchy begins at the time of Shakespeare, 1600, when the East India Company is founded, and ends in 1802 when the company has got as far as Delhi and taken over.
It's
the
a bit
world.
like Star Wars. We have the
Which
trilogy, and
is,
then we go
I mean,
back.
it's a similar. I mean, it's similar in that it's an epic tale of an evil empire. Yes, and that sadly, there's no Luke Skywalker figure coming along to save the day, nor indeed a Yoda.
Yeah.
But yeah, but just
The laser
quickly
was used
go
to
through them.
populate the country. Yeah. Sorry.
Um,
Sorry.
so
Go back. Go back.
4 books to return to the sales pitch. Anarchy, 1600 to 1802. Then there's White Moguls, which is the micro story of a love affair, which shows what's going on behind all these sort of big political machinations, which is individuals falling in love. So Khairunisa, who's the ethnic Iranian granddaughter of the Prime Minister of Hyderabad, falls in love with the East India Company ambassador, resident, as it was called at the time. And that's the story of the second volume, White Moguls. He converts to Islam and becomes a secret agent working against the East India Company. So again, rather extraordinary story and against what you imagine to be happening at this time. The third volume takes us up to Afghanistan, which is the highest moment of hubris for the East India Company. Having taken over India, they think, wow, we'll just add Afghanistan to their portfolio. In they go, and of course it all ends in spectacularly in tears, exactly as it is again 300 years later at the moment. And the East India Company get badly defeated by the Afghans, who do unite against them properly in 1840 and drive them out. And famously, of the retreat from Kabul, when the East India Company army retreats through the winter passes, one man makes it out alive, and that is Dr. Bryden on his horse. In fact, there are a few more, but the legend at least has it that there was one man who escaped. And finally, the final volume is Last Mogul, which tells the story of the Great Uprising, what sometimes called the First War of Independence in India, what in India, in Britain is called inaccurately the Sepoy Mutiny or the Mutiny, which I call, trying to be neutral here, the Great Uprising. And that's the story of the great slaughter, which ends both the Moguls and the company, because in 1858 the company is effectively nationalized. The British government steps in and says, you guys are making a complete mess of this, and they take over. So from that point you get the British Raj, 1858. But again, what's surprising is, we're all brought up to think about the British Raj, whether it's you regard it in patriotic British textbooks as the Great British Empire, or whether in Indian textbooks it's the terrible looter, invader, plunderer. But it only lasts 90 years, 1858 to 1947. While the East India Company, the period that you're being looted by a corporate, lasts 250 years, which is 1600 to 1857. So it's more than twice the length of the bit that we keep hearing about in movies, and Kipling, Curzon, all the stuff we know about is the final chapter only.
Just quickly to pause on that for a second. So how did the East India Company, when they came in, what was it, Jahangir's court? I can't remember now.
First of all,
but they came in, and they came in humbly, with a head bowed and following the laws and rules and whatever.
As well they might, because at this point, Britain, or rather England, because Britain doesn't even exist at this point. It is just England, which it's fractured into different countries, and England is an independent kingdom. The Scots are at war. And also wanting to have eyeing a bit of slice of the imperial cake themselves. And so England at this point only generates 4% of the world's GDP at a time that the Mughal Empire is generating 40% of the world's
India!
GDP.
Sorry. This government trains us to react in that way.
You don't hear that said, but yes, this is one of the two moments in Indian history when you can say India is ahead of China. The other time is the time of Ashoka. And between that, almost every other period of history, China is producing more manufacturers and creating more and bigger factories, better.
You've broken many hearts on the podcast. We are trained to be very anti-China. Horrible statement.
Well, I would never live in China, and have visited only a few times. But yeah, as an economic might, no one can deny it. China historically has always had that. And this point is, and the reason the company comes to India at this point is because it is so rich, and they are impoverished economic migrants stumbling around in their codpieces from the court
So,
in
so
London,
William,
coming
sorry to
to
interrupt, but
rich.
there's no master plan by a group of businessmen sitting in an office in London. They've just come there to look at opportunity. Am I right? And then it's sort of
Correct.
it's organic. The growth and the way they slowly the tentacles of the East India
Well,
Company take over.
it starts off very much as a very lucrative economic venture, and it really gets going when the Mughal Empire implodes after the death of Aurangzeb. 1707, Aurangzeb dies. The Marathas burst out from Maharashtra and burn Surat, for example, the big Mughal port. And so by this point, hundreds of people across the country are taking things into their own hands. So effectively, the Maharaja of Jodhpur doesn't answer to anyone but himself, ditto Jaipur, ditto Tanjore, ditto Hyderabad. So you have all these guys looking after, feathering their own nest. And that's why when you go around India today as a tourist, a lot of the stuff you see is built at this time. Most of the big Rajput forts in Rajasthan. There's some early stuff, but a lot of it is 18th century. The Lake Palace in Udaipur, all that sort of stuff. Ditto the hill forts, ditto Tanjore, ditto Hyderabad. This is the period when people are no longer sending their taxes to Delhi. They're just spending it on goodies for themselves. And so you have these spectacular palaces popping up in provincial towns all over India. And for the company, this is great because they can just pick off one after another. And their only real enemy and serious rival is the French, who are also up to the same game, a little bit
Always
to the south.
French. It's always the
It's
bloody
always
French.
the French.
Yeah.
So it's what I love about this is that in a sense you've got two stories going on simultaneously, two extraordinarily contemporary stories for us today when you read the history of this period. One, you've got the story of colonialism, which of course has shaped for better or worse, and you can go on forever on the damages that colonialism did to India, but also the way it changed it unquestionably forever in every way. In fact, we're speaking English now, apart from anything else. And then,
thank God. But not that we should ever say that. Yeah.
No, why watch it, Cyrus? Watch it. And
you're a Scot.
but the second story, yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm not speaking Gaelic, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
The second story is the story of big corporations, because the East India Company is the first of the mega companies. When today we're worried that Google is looking at our emails or Facebook is processing our contact list and sending it off to lingerie stores or whatever it is doing with all our detail. But as soon as you Google something, it turns up as an advert the next day. Those sort of anxieties about big corporations that also don't necessarily pay their taxes in the way that we'd all like, and they don't seem to be. It all seems to be going to some offshore Cayman Islands account rather than into the Indian Treasury.
This is the right podcast for all that. Yes. Go on.
So the idea that a corporation can outwit the state is something that happens for the first time with the East India Company, and it happens. What's interesting is, we think of the East India Company as something which is training its guns on India, and it did, but it's also training its guns on the British state and sort of hollowing it out from the inside. So within a century of its birth, 1599 is its application for a corporation. Less than a century later, in 1695, I think, just about 95 years later, it's caught for the first time bribing MPs, something, of course, that could never happen in India today. And
No,
and you have, they're literally caught with brown envelopes in their hands, handing it over to a corporate house is handing over money to individual MPs in order for them to vote to extend the monopoly. And this is, the first time in world history that you've got MPs being bribed by a corporation. And of course, this is the story that goes on, and we're only seeing the beginnings of that. But it leads on. Yeah, and this is not something, we joke about India or the Adanis or anything else, but of course, exactly the same thing's happening in Washington. There's and the East India Company invents corporate lobbying. So this whole world whereby not only in India, but in London, in New York, in Toronto, in Paris, the world where just finish the thought. The world where a corporation can bribe a parliament to do something that it wants to help make a bigger profit. That world opens with the East India Company, and they invent things like corporate lobbying and bribing MPs, so that by the 1970s you've got things like, or 1950s you've got the Anglo-Persian Oil Company organizing a coup in Iran. So Mossadegh's democratically elected government gets pulled down. A year later in Guatemala, you have another coup in Guatemala because the United Fruit Company is about to have its lands nationalized, hence the phrase Banana Republic, which is with us still this day. The way that Chile was brought down, Salvador Allende's government in Chile is brought down by ITT. And today, the way that different corporations can, I think no one would deny in any political party the fact that the way that corporate India moved its support from Congress to BJP was clearly a major factor in the changing politics of this country. So this whole world of a corporation changing the politics of a country begins with the East India Company, which is why, to me, it's bonkers that there hasn't been more written about it, and why this is not well known in both at a scholarly and a popular level.
Again, William, you've broken many hearts here, and you've hurt me personally in the last 2 minutes because you're saying that bribery, which is one of our great traditions and something we're so proud of, is not ours. It's yours, or not even yours.
I'm afraid. Well, I think it also existed. I mean, bribery as such existed, obviously, in many cultures at many times in history. But the idea that a corporation goes out in an organized fashion and bribes politicians, I'm afraid, is another colonial import.
Yeah. These are traditions I'm very proud of. I don't see the negative downside of all that, except, of course, a fractured country. But as you said, there was no sense of nationalism for the most part. So why are we complaining at that point from that perspective? But we need to take a quick break and take in questions because there are millions of people who want to ask questions. Just 2 or 3 minutes quickly. I just want to know the transition from the Scottish man to this iconic writer. If you can just tell us how that happened.
So I was born and brought up in the Scottish countryside, was always interested in history, pretty untraveled though. Went to school in the middle of the North Yorkshire moors to some bonkers Catholic monastery school, deliberately placed miles from anywhere so that there were no women, there was no distractions. The monks didn't seem to know there were hallucinogenic mushrooms growing in the wild moors beside us. That was our only form of entertainment. And I came out pretty untraveled to India. I actually wanted to go and originally dig in the Middle East, in an Assyrian site in Iraq, and that ended up not happening because the British School of Archaeology in Baghdad got closed down by Saddam Hussein. So I ended up coming with a friend and taught in the school in Dehradun for a bit, then wandered around and actually just fell in love with this place. There's no other really description for it. I absolutely loved it. I was fascinated by the history, and came back after Cambridge and have more or less lived in Delhi all my adult life now.
And you have the War of the Roses, Lancashire, Yorkshire, and the penny rivalry, Scotland and England. But we have Mumbai, Delhi. And so as a Mumbaiker, we're fascinated by the fact that an intelligent, a man of sophistication, a man of, liberal thought and philosophy and, academic par excellence, why would you go to Delhi?
Well, my Parsi friends particularly used to ask me this when I first went there. But I think 20 years on, Delhi is now the place where all the publishers are. It's where all the newspapers are. It's where the media is. And I find when I come to Bombay, there's lots of lovely Parsis to talk to, and there's all sorts of, and there's the
divide
whole world of Bollywood. But and all the glamour of Bombay and all the money of Bombay, but definitely, I think that Delhi is now, for better or worse, the place where all the writers and intellectuals live, and in a way that was unimaginable when I first arrived in the late 80s, when in a sense, all the Don Moraises and there was a huge poetry scene in Bombay. That I feel is, there are still a few great writers in Bombay, but it seems to have migrated to Delhi, and so. My lovely Bombay friends say it less than they used to say. Why the hell do you live in Delhi? Delhi now has, for better or worse, become the kind of New York of India. It's a place where you see Northeasterners. No, I really feel it. I actually genuinely feel it. It's within the world of India. It's multicultural. You get a whole area of Humayunpur, where all the Northeasterners and the Tibetans are. Next door, you've got a little Guju colony. You go off to Siar Park, and it's full of Bengalis, and you can get Mishti Doi. And there's that sensation that the Afghans are hanging around the Lodi Gardens having picnics, and you get the sensation that the whole of India, in all its diversity, is in Delhi in a way that it's not in Chennai, which is still Tamil
I
dominated. It's not in Mumbai, which is largely still Marathi, and with the honourable Parsi exceptions. It's not in Calcutta, which is still very much Bong. And Delhi, for all its pollution, for all the mess, for all the violence, is still an incredibly multicultural, fizzing city full of writers and media. And the things that I loved about Delhi 40 years ago, like Nizamuddin and the old city, they're still there. But now you've got all this other stuff too. No, it's an exciting place to live. I could leave tomorrow if I wanted to, but I haven't.
You've got the writers and you've got the non-readers. That's Delhi, the mix, a perfect mix. But I have another theory, but you won't reveal her name, so there's no point getting to my theory. But you love Delhi. You're a big fan of India, and in fact, like I said, this is highly embarrassing. You're just taking me through a tour of Delhi, and although I visited so much, your knowledge of the neighborhood is amazing. I'm just thinking. I'm trying to remember the places you mentioned. Having this group of people or that group of people, and it's a little scary. So please don't play that game about I know India better than the Indians. You do. Let's take a break. We'll bring in young Silvery, also known as Antariksh, a very young man who also has a sense of history. Let's see what he has to offer. Silvery, please appear like magic.
Yes. Hello.
There you go.
Hi.
Silvery, that was very impressive.
Yeah, it's
how
like
do
a
you do
magic
that?
trick. We just had a musician on today. She taught us how
He's
to do
the Indian
that.
Harry Potter. Go on.
Apparated.
Should I get to the AMAs?
Please do. Try and
Yep.
get
All
as
right.
many questions as possible because William will have to have lunch. UK, it's lunchtime in a few minutes, or maybe it already is. Yeah. Go ahead.
Still got
All right.
20
Sure.
minutes.
Yep. The first one comes in from Ruturaj Shinde. He says, "Hey Cyrus and guest, huge fan of the podcast. I love it whenever you talk history on the show and love the theories you are able to form out of any topic. Do you ever think about how India and some other countries would have fared during the pandemic if they were still under British rule?"
Well,
It's a very
if British
tough.
rule meant
Yeah,
British
it's
rule meant Boris
romanticizing, I think, a little
Johnson,
bit.
probably. If British rule meant Boris Johnson, probably not very differently from how it's faring now, I suspect. But well, no, I think the obvious answer to that is that British colonialism did not encourage Indian businesses. So the huge pharmaceutical companies, Mr. Poonawalla and all the rest of it, which are have to be the answer to this, would not have existed in the way they do now under colonial rule. That's the nature of colonial rule. So no, I think that if only the
So there's,
pharmaceutical companies were able
I
to get to grips with vaccinating the population in the way that they must do now.
no, I think William, what Rudraj is trying to say is more about the discipline. There are a lot of old timers who believe that there was a sense of discipline, along with the cruelty, of course, etc., and the exploitation, with the British had, which we don't seem to have. And that's why our standard of 5% is a little appalling at the moment. I know it's a huge population, but there's a sense of the discipline of both the people and the rulers not coming to the table and in a disciplined, civilized, correct way, clinical way.
Well, I mean, the old line that Mussolini made the train run on time. Yes, authoritarian governments do have a discipline, but that's a discipline that is run on summary judgments and long jail sentences and all the rest of it. So I know I would prefer the chaotic independent India in every way to the colonial.
But they've taken away all our liberties. You don't know what it's been like. If I walk my dog, there's an idiot telling me you can't walk your dog. Let him use your home toilet. I mean,
Well, he sounds like he's busy in the background behind you, Cyrus.
That's Mary, the female. Peter's the male. He doesn't talk. He's fast asleep. He's a good Indian male. He does nothing with his life. Yeah, Mary is there. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. We've gone to the dogs, as you can see, just in the manner of this podcast. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next question.
All
Silvery?
right, sure. Next one comes in from Shivani Gaur. She says, "Hey Cyrus and guest, I think most moments in history are extremely interesting. You just need the right kind of teachers in your schooling years to get you hooked to the subject at hand. I feel a lot of Indian teachers fall short in this regard, as teaching history requires a certain level of storytelling as well, and maybe not all of our teachers are good at that part. What do you think history teachers in India and abroad need to inculcate so that history isn't just another period for young students to catch a snooze in?"
This is one of the great sort of tragedies, I think, of Indian education, is that everyone says this. It's not just Shivani here. Everyone seems to be bored stiff by their history lessons, and that was not the case when I went to school. We were bored by our physics lessons and our maths lessons, and history was, an exciting 40 minutes that we recovered from the other classes in. Certainly, I and my group of friends loved our history lessons. But I hear this from everyone. And almost every fan letter I've ever had from an Indian reader begins, I hated history at school, but I think it matters too, because if you're not, so there's two things that's happening. It's not just that history is taught badly at schools. It's also that academic Indian historians very rarely reach out and write for a general audience in an interesting manner. So you don't have any equivalents of the British historian Linda Colley, who is probably the highest regarded British historian alive at the moment, and who's won every conceivable medal and award, but also writes for a general audience. Stephen Greenblatt in the States, who wrote a book called The Swerve, won the Pulitzer Prize, sat at the top of the New York Times bestseller list, sold 1 million copies, is one of the great books on the Renaissance. But he's the professor of English at Harvard and the world's greatest Shakespearean. But for some reason that I don't understand, you're not getting Indian academics, or up to now, very few Indian academics have done more than write for their peers. So you get 1 million brilliant studies of subaltern studies and written in post-colonial language that frankly no one wants to read except if you're on an exam course. And on one hand, this is I find baffling, and I think it's very worrying, because it means that many Indians are extremely ignorant about their history, and they just don't know it. And therefore, they're more susceptible to myth and sort of, WhatsApp versions of history that go around saying that, the internet was invented before the Mahabharata and there were nuclear weapons and helicopters.
You've heard all that.
Excellent. And all that stuff. Exactly. And all that thrives in a world where no one enjoyed history at school and where no one reads history as an adult. But it's very dangerous for a nation to have a world where people don't know their history, and now, luckily you're getting now a whole generation of young writers like fantastic Manu Pillai or Aramakoti, who are coming up now and really writing amazing history books that people are reading and winning awards and selling them abroad. But it didn't happen for a while, and what was a weird situation when I arrived in India was that India had this world-beating first 11 of fiction writers. Salman Rushdie, Vikram Seth, Arundhati Roy, Jhumpal Lahiri. You could go on forever with all the Indians that have won the Booker Prize. But it didn't have an equivalent first 11 of non-fiction writers and biographers. And no one was reading this stuff because it wasn't there. And on one hand, I've been lucky in that this is the space I've occupied. And my books have sold as well as they have in India because, frankly, for many years, there was no competition. It's coming now, and people like Ira,
Amish Tripathi,
slightly different, Amish Tripathi, but Manu and these younger historians, are doing great work, and people are reading their work and they're learning their history. But and of course, it shouldn't be that a foreigner is teaching this stuff. But maybe it should be Indian writers. But now it is changing, and I think that's very important.
But I just want to put my 10 cents in. I think there's a simple theory we can use here as writers. I'm a historian myself. Sex every 9 pages. Sex every 9 pages will save the book and keep the interest alive. For example, Akbar had 900 concubines. It's not difficult. In the middle of this war, he takes a break. It's Thursday evening. He has a drink. Boom. Sex.
Well, White Moguls is my sort of book that explores that side of life, and it is the story of a very raunchy love affair. But what was great about that story was that James Achilles Kirkpatrick, the British ambassador in Hyderabad, who was having this affair with the Prime Minister's granddaughter, wrote the gory details in code to his brother in Calcutta. So we get the full graphic details of every single encounter between these two in code. And there's one letter that has the code written above it. So we're able to read all that stuff, and so sex in books tends to be in fiction and novels rather than in Indian history books. But it needn't be. Obviously, it's there, and it's a bigger part of life in the past as it is in the present. So yes, battles also keep the momentum going, and a good bit of warfare, and history books shouldn't be boring. Indian history is not boring. it is full of extraordinary heroic tales. It's full of bizarre, bonkers stories, mass suicides, huge takeovers of civilizations, the building of some of the greatest monuments in the world. It's not difficult to make this stuff interesting. It is extraordinary history. And in a sense, what I've been telling, which is the story of a corporation, is one of the more boring bits. There are many other extraordinary tales waiting to be told by a talented writer of nonfiction, and I think they're coming up now.
And now, for our listening pleasure, William Dalrymple will read an erotic chapter from White Nichols.
If you're serious, I can go get it.
I am, but yeah.
I've only
So
got
William-
Anarchy here beside me.
So, William, do you think the problem
Sorry.
lies in the curriculum or lies in the teachers? I think you're saying more the curriculum is probably the problem.
Well, the fact that everyone says it implies it isn't just one or two teachers in one or two schools.
Yeah.
It's a more universal problem, and I think this thing. I'm told. I obviously I never studied history in an Indian school, but I'm told that all this rote learning of dates and things is the thing that turns everyone on.
Oh,
Sorry, I think
something
William just got a
strange has
call.
happened.
I think he
Yeah.
just got a call. So
I'm back.
But
I'm
he's
back.
also-
Okay.
Are you there?
I'm there.
I got all
sorry,
that talk about sex, and next thing we know, you're in a different position.
I am. I'm horizontal. You're quite right.
Yes.
yeah. So also your cameras.
Not sure how
hung
that
for some
happened,
reason.
but there we go.
Your
Do you
camera
Now
is,
history is
Do
really
you need the
interesting. Yeah.
Hang on, see what
camera
I can do
stuck. Could you please switch it off and switching it on again? Your camera, maybe that'll work.
here. Yeah, there we go. Is that better? Camera
yes,
mic.
we can't see you.
Cam, got it. Hang on one second.
Okay, yeah.
And we've
Haven't
got
sorted
the
it out.
audio.
Okay, we've got the audio, but your face is still stuck. Like,
Shall I leave and
the
come
frame
back?
is still stuck.
I'll leave and come back.
Yep, sure. Yeah, I think you can just refresh your page and you can just come back. Yeah. Oh yeah, no worries.
All right.
That is super interesting.
Yep. We just got a couple of questions left, but William, for some reason, technology in Great Britain is not what it is in India. They don't have the kind of connectivity we have. And
Yeah, of
I've
course.
been saying from the beginning that we need to help countries around the world with our
Yeah, we
massive
should colonize them
science.
for a change.
We
Yeah.
have. Have you been to South Hall or Hounslow?
A
It's
lot of
gone.
Indians there.
You don't see any ethnic English people at all. I mean, they just actually London is like 40% ethnic English. The rest is all immigrants. Sorry, we were having a discussion on migrating laws and xenophobia and Brexit. But let's go on to the next one.
All right, sure. Next one comes from Lloyd D'Souza. He says, "Hey, Cyrus and guest, massive fan. I've been listening to the podcast all through the pandemic. Hope you keep doing it for a long, long time." He says, "My question is, what lessons do you think we humans would have learned during previous pandemics like the Spanish flu? And do you think there were lessons we learned that we have since forgotten from that time?"
Well, I think yes. I mean, I've never studied the Spanish flu, but there's been a lot of sort of memes and images posted over the last 2 years on social media and stuff, and it looked very similar. I mean, people were wearing masks. There was social distancing, and there was quarantine, and those are the tools which have had to be learnt again. I mean, none of us have been in quarantine in our adult lives. It's something you read about in novels and movies, and ships off the coast of Mumbai being quarantined. And in the 19th century, I've certainly never been aware of being under quarantine before in my life. But it's something that happened very frequently in history. One of the most interesting podcasts we had, one of the most interesting talks we had at the Jaipur Literature Festival last year was Stephen Greenblatt, the guy I was talking about, who's the #1 bestseller, but also the Harvard professor. And he said that during Shakespeare's adult life, I can't remember the exact figures, but let's say the Globe Theatre was open for 25 years. For 15 years of it, it was closed because of pandemics in Elizabethan London. Now, that's a bit of history that modern literary historians have ignored because it didn't figure in their lives. But now suddenly it seems terribly familiar, and if you actually look at Shakespeare's life, his experience of London was entirely formed by the sort of thing we're going now, which is these waves of pandemic coming and going, and life beginning again. Then the first thing that is closed then as now is the theatre. So this is not something that's unique to us. It feels unique to us because it hasn't happened in our generation. But it was happening as recently as the 1930s, and as you say, the Spanish flu.
Well, the Spanish will fly tonight. If this is a recording, but for the time of the recording, when they play Italy. Just for those who are interested in football, just diverting them. Do you have any stake in the Euro Cup, or it's not your thing?
Well, no, I supported Scotland until we got knocked out, and now I've reverted to reluctantly supporting the English. Now that they're winning, rather like the East India Company, you end up supporting the winner just for.
Well, they're led by a young Marathi-speaking man called Hari Kane, so you can't go wrong.
How can you go wrong? Exactly. How can you go wrong?
Okay, can we squeeze one more in, Silvery?
Yes, sure. The last one comes from Harbal Singh. He says, "Hi, Cyrus and guest. Cyrus, what part of Indian history would you say is most appealing to those not from India?"
Well, that's
for you.
That should be more for William, shouldn't it? Although now he's more like a
yes.
Desi himself, so I guess you can't call him an outsider from any stretch of the imagination. I don't know. I like the Magadh Empire a lot. Which I think we don't talk about. All the South dynasties, that the Cholas and the Pallavas and all, which have not been explored enough. We have a very North Indian slant to the teachings that at least I had in South Mumbai. And I felt only later discovered that, they had the biggest ships, had the biggest navies, conquered the more territory and things like that, were not given enough. So there's lots of stuff that we haven't discovered. In the Battle of Kalinga, for that. Yeah, go ahead.
This is absolutely what I'm writing about now. My new book, the Company Quartet is now closed. It's 4 books. It's finished. And that's 20 years on the 18th century, and that's done. And I'm now moving to stuff which I love, but I haven't written about much outside a few magazine articles. And that's the early period when Indian influence is going out over the rest of Asia. So part 1 of this book, which is called The Golden Road, is the story of Buddhism, which begins in obviously Lumbini on the Pearl border, Bihar, spreads up through Pakistan, Afghanistan, into China, and takes over China. You have an Indian religion takes over China. And in 664, the Empress Wu Zetian, who's the only empress in Indian history, partly because she's a concubine who seized control of the Chinese empire, the Tang Empire. And because the Confucians don't like women running things, she converts China to Buddhism. It's an extraordinary story. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the story with your Pallavas and Cholas, particularly the Pallavas, of how Hinduism goes and Sanskrit sweeps down to Southeast Asia, and how everywhere from Gandhara, which is Kandahar, Gandhara, to Singapura, ends up with a Sanskrit name. Java is Sanskrit. Java, a barley corn, and culminating obviously in Angkor Wat, the largest Hindu temple in the world, is built not in India, it's built in Cambodia. So how did that happen? Again, India's always surprised when they go to Angkor Wat and they find the churning of the ocean on the whole of the back wall, and the whole images of the Mahabharata and Ramayana all over Southeast Asia. The national airline of Indonesia is Garuda. And people just don't expect this from India anymore. They think of Hinduism is conceived very much in nationalistic terms as Indian religion. And what the hell is it doing in Southeast Asia? So that's part 2 of the book. Part 3 is the story of how Indian mathematical and scientific ideas traveled westwards and went first to Baghdad, where there's an extraordinary family who are the Buddhist hereditary abbots from a monastery in Balkh, which is in Afghanistan, but was a Buddhist monastery with Sanskrit as the lingua franca. They convert to Islam and they become the viziers in Baghdad. And you know how I don't know whether you've ever seen the Disney Aladdin, where the villain is Jafar. Jafar is one of the Barma kids. His family are from Balkh, and these are the guys that bring Indian mathematicians from Ujjain and Mount Abu, Brahmagupta's followers, to Baghdad. And how Indian numbers, first seen on Ashoka columns and in the Nanagat inscription just above Bombay, how that ends up as the numbers in the Arabic world, and from there spreads around the Arab world. And then the final bit of the final chapter of the final section is the story of how a young man from Pisa learns these Indian numbers, Indian mathematical No, he's from Venice. Another guy who you will have heard him. You can guess it. So this young Pisan guy, his dad runs the Pisan Customs House on the Algerian coast, and he being an expat is brought up in what's now Algeria. He goes to school and he learns the Indian numbers. He learns the Indian mathematics, and he goes back home to Pisa and he writes a book called the Liber Abaci, which at first the Book of Numbers, which no one at first reads. But then it comes to the attention of the Emperor Frederick II. He comes to Pisa, and they have I don't believe you have anything like Countdown on Indian television. You have a kind of mathematical contest live on with people having this happens in Pisa, and the young man wins. His name is Fibonacci, and Leonardo Fibonacci brings Indian numbers finally in the 12th century to Italy, where up to this point they've been doing long division with Roman numbers, XXV times XXVMX, which is not easy to do. And it's much, much easier to do it with Indian numbers and the decimal system and place value that we're all taught everywhere in the world. So it's these three things. So it's Buddhism, Hinduism and Sanskrit, and Indian mathematics and numbers. And I've been loving it. I have to say, I'm 2 years into my reading for this, and I'll probably start writing in January.
Wow. So we've got the first take on the new book, which is not even
Actually,
out
yes.
yet.
I think you have.
Yeah, we have. It's an exclusive. Sadly, Silvery, it's the point where Peter, my Saluki, removed the light, and I'm trying to relight myself. So I lost my light while he was shining the light of his new book onto us. So the irony is appalling. But
the Indian man has woken up. Look what happens. That knocks over the.
I'm in the dark ages, William. I'm very happy there. Let me exist in peace pre-internet. But listen, it's been great talking to you. Lots of fun in the middle of this horrible pandemic. I know London's looking a lot better than us at the moment, but you'll come back to Delhi
things turn around quickly.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And what an eye-opener. Great stuff. Hope to catch up with you. Also, I have an aunt in East Acton, Biba. Could you deliver 100 pounds to her? We haven't sent in a brown envelope, similar to what the MP's got.
This is the East India Company methods, exactly.
Just giving you a taste of Delhi, so you don't forget us. All right, cheers. Have a good lunch. I'm sure you've got lots to do.
Thanks, Cyrus. Thanks, Silvery. Good to meet you both.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Sorry, bro, I can't get this light on. Now it'll come on.
Yeah, Rishi, you can stop the recording, man.
Yeah, we don't have anything else to record, right?
Nothing else. Yep.
Bye,
tomorrow,
guys.
Cyrus, tomorrow.